Can you start by talking us through the main points of your report?
Sure. The size of the territory that the Islamic State is governing has reduced quite significantly over the last few months, partly as a result of foreign support for proxies on the ground. We've seen that the Kurds have increased their territory by something like 186% over the course of 2015. This was largely driven by U.S. aerial support for them. We've also seen that the group has lost a lot of territory in Iraq to the government and to the Shia militias that are there. On the whole, the Islamic State is close to having all of its key supply routes cut off, with the group experiencing a serious squeeze along the Turkish border after the fall of Tal Abyad and after the Turkish Republic imposed some additional measures. And as a result of the attempts by the Kurds, the Syrian government and so on, to try to separate the city of Mosul from Deir ez-Zor and from Raqqa, which would take away the group's key military advantage.
It's interesting that you're not talking about the Russian intervention as a factor in this loss of ground by the Islamic State group.
They've contributed largely in the Homs area, and they have to some extent helped the Kurds in northern Aleppo. But the focus of the Russians was not on the Islamic State. It was on the various threats to the Syrian government, and it was mainly intended to rescue core territories for the Syrian government, including around Latakia and around Damascus and Aleppo.
And how does the Islamic State group's decline affect the balance of power on the ground among rival groups?
Well, the array of different kinds of foreign interventions does risk forcing some kind of jihadist unity. But one of the interesting things that we are seeing is that some of the Syrian insurgency seems to be turning against groups like Jabhat al-Nusra, for example, which we view as an equally important threat to the Islamic State. If we see a tendency through which the various insurgents in Syria and Iraq decide that the hardline Islamists are not their best representatives, that would be quite transformative, but we are some way from that still.
And is the intervention that's most efficient that was on the ground, or these aerial bombings also taking their toll?
To discredit the idea of Islamic governance, you need to take away the territory that is governed in accordance to a literalist reading of Sharia. And so it is really the ground component that can stop these guys from controlling populations and from basically taking on some of the functions of government. So the actual defeat of this ideology has to come from denying it territory, and this is only done through ground forces.
Firas Abi Ali, thank you very much for having spoken to us on behalf of IHS. Thanks
for hosting me.